As soon as he entered the prison, he was met with a barrage of punches, followed by scalding coffee spat straight into his face. The violence only stopped when a cracking sound came from his mouth, and his teeth shattered onto the floor. What they didn't realize was that Cain had once made his living by breaking other people's bones. Inside those cold, unforgiving walls, they didn't break him, they forged something far more terrifying. They turned him into a ruthless killer, so brutal and unhinged that redemption was no longer an option. Just a few years earlier, Cain had been a struggling boxer, barely scraping by. Desperate for a way out, he had turned to his brother, asking for money to start a business. Lincoln agreed to lend Cain the money, but only on one condition. With no other options, Cain accepted, even though he had no idea what the task involved. Later, he was told it was simple. Take a plastic bag from a poor woman's hands and bring it back to the office. Unaware of the consequences, Cain carried out the robbery. But to his surprise, the woman panicked and ran after him. Her desperation so intense, it was as if her entire life depended on that bag. The chase came to a tragic end when the woman was struck by a car. Cain, shocked by the horrific scene, was arrested on the spot. Days later, he was brought in to meet O'Hara, a seasoned detective who had been investigating his brother for years. It was then that Cain learned the truth. Lincoln was running a ruthless loan sharking operation. O'Hara urged Cain to cooperate and help bring his brother to justice. But even with full knowledge of Lincoln's crimes, Cain chose silence and loyalty to his family. Cain was brought in to face Sergeant Evans, a muscular, merciless interrogator known for his corruption and for beating confessions out of suspects without a detective's approval. Evans unleashed a savage beating on Cain. Even with his hands tied, Cain tried to resist, but Evans's sledgehammer-like punches eventually overwhelmed him. After the assault, Cain was transferred to Belmar Prison, a filthy, violent hellhole infamous for its brutality and known by its grim nickname, the Meat Grinder. With no prior convictions, Cain quickly realized he was entering a world filled with danger and constant threats. On his very first day, he was attacked by a towering inmate without warning. He tried to defend himself, but the fight escalated into a vicious brawl involving several other prisoners. Though he managed to take down a few, he was ultimately overwhelmed. The remaining inmates swarmed him and shattered his front teeth, a savage warning of the brutal reality that awaited him. Following the violent attack, Cain was fitted with metal dentures, something he surprisingly grew to like, as they gave him a more intimidating appearance. Not long after, his mother, Mrs. Burgess, visited him in prison and delivered news that left him stunned. Lincoln, the very brother he had always stood by, had pinned the blame for his own arrest on Cain and had no plans to help him. The betrayal cut deep. Cain's loyalty, once unwavering, now meant nothing. The brother he had trusted completely had abandoned him without a second thought. Even though it was Lincoln who had put him behind bars, Cain stayed mentally strong and asked his mother to relay a message, urging his brother to reach out. But days passed in silence, no visits, no phone calls, not even a single letter. In time, Cain was forced to face a painful reality. He had been completely abandoned. From that moment on, he knew survival would depend on no one but himself. Throughout his time in prison, Cain found himself under constant attack from other inmates, often without any clear reason. Pushed to the edge, and with no one to rely on, he realized he had no choice but to learn how to defend himself. Determined to survive, he threw himself into a relentless training regimen, both physically and mentally sharpening his body and mind for whatever threats lay ahead. Then one day, a brutal fight erupted between him and two other inmates. Thanks to his relentless training, Cain took down the two attackers with just a few powerful blows. As he stood over them, catching his breath and savoring the hard-earned victory, a devastating truth came to light. One of the beaten inmates revealed that Cain's own brother had placed a 20,000 pounds bounty on his head. Every attack Cain had suffered in prison was the result of that betrayal. The moment Cain heard the truth, rage consumed him, and for the first time, he had a clear purpose: revenge. Giving up was no longer an option. He was determined to make those responsible for his downfall pay. The bounty on his head continued to draw more inmates into the fight, turning the prison into a battlefield. But with every new enemy, Cain grew stronger, both in resolve and in reputation. Each brutal encounter left him with fresh wounds, extended sentences, and long stretches in solitary confinement. Yet none of it broke him. It only hardened him. The inmates tried everything to bring Cain down, even resorting to a prison-manufactured flammable chemical called napalm, which left part of his face badly burned. Over time, Cain began to transform into something unrecognizable, a ruthless, feral being driven solely by the instinct to survive. In that brutal state, all traces of compassion within him vanished. Even the prison guards feared Cain's strength. Some had even been seriously injured trying to contain him. For 3 long years, Cain endured the harsh realities of prison life. Then one day, his mother visited with devastating news. She had pancreatic cancer and didn't have much time left. Crushed by the revelation, Cain couldn't bring himself to tell her the truth about Lincoln's crimes. He knew that, in her final days, he was the only person she had left to hold on to. As time went on, Mrs. Burgess's health continued to decline. While Cain was recovering in the prison hospital after a violent clash, Detective O'Hara paid him a visit. During their conversation, Cain learned a shocking truth. Sergeant Evans, the corrupt cop who had once brutally tortured him, had been working for Lincoln all along, serving as his undercover enforcer inside the system. Detective O'Hara explained that once he discovered the truth, he had immediately fired Evans and realized that Lincoln was planning to have Cain killed. Determined to stop him, O'Hara once again urged Cain to help bring Lincoln to justice. This time, Cain agreed on one condition. He wanted to see his mother one last time before she passed away. Under tight security, Cain was escorted to the hospital to visit his dying mother. But when he reached her bedside, it was too late. She had just taken her final breath. The realization hit him hard. Had he arrived moments earlier, he could have said goodbye. Grief quickly gave way to rage. As the elevator doors closed, Cain launched a sudden, vicious attack on the guards escorting him. Cain struck with such speed and ferocity that the guards had no time to react one by one. They collapsed unconscious onto the elevator floor. Wasting no time, he bolted through the hospital's back exit and made a clean escape. In the following scene, Cain is seen attempting to enter a private bar, but is stopped by the security at the door. After a brief series of hand-to-hand skirmishes, Cain swiftly took down the guards and entered the bar. Inside, he was met by an arrogant bartender named Bez. Cain coolly introduced himself as a member and ordered a large beer. As he sipped his drink, he quietly tuned in to a conversation taking place among a group seated across the bar. The group belonged to a gang that had recently pulled back on their operations after the death of a member named Rook and the unexplained disappearance of their accountant. Tun, who had witnessed Rook's death firsthand, began to recount the incident from his point of view. He described how, during a routine drug deal at their usual hangout, they spotted a stranger lurking nearby, silently watching them from the shadows. While Tun was occupied with a customer, Rook approached the stranger to confront him about why he was watching their group. When the man remained silent, Rook lost his temper and prepared to throw a punch. But before he could strike, an axe came crashing down, severing his arm and sending him sprawling to the ground. Tun claimed that after witnessing Rook's murder, he had bravely chased the killer off, forcing him to flee. But Cain responded with open contempt. He laughed mockingly, clearly doubting the story, and scoffed that Tun wasn't nearly strong enough to scare anyone. According to Cain, it was actually Tun who panicked and ran the moment Rook was killed. Enraged by the accusation, Tun furiously denied it and began hurling threats in response. The gang quickly rallied around Tun, ready to escalate the confrontation. But when Cain revealed that he was the very psychopath they had been talking about, the room fell silent. Everyone stepped back in stunned disbelief. Bez, the bartender, immediately demanded that Cain leave her bar. At that moment, the guards Cain had previously knocked out came charging in, trying to attack him. But Cain reacted instantly, taking them down with ease. Then, without a word, he drew a double-barreled pistol. The message was clear: he didn't need to speak. The weapon alone made it obvious just how dangerous things had become. Cain quickly overpowered most of the gang, leaving them with no choice but to reveal the location of their boss Lincoln, a corrupt businessman who had built his empire on illegal deals. Lincoln was also Cain's brother. But instead of confronting Lincoln, Cain came face to face with Hyde, Lincoln's most trusted and loyal enforcer, someone who remembered Cain's past all too well. Hyde wasted no time introducing Cain to the gang, announcing that he was the boss's brother, a man who had made grave mistakes and paid for them in prison. With a smirk, Hyde mocked the scars on Cain's face, hinting at the humiliations he might have suffered behind bars. Suddenly, one of the bodyguards lunged at Cain, but before he could get close, a bullet tore through his kneecap. His leg gave out and he crashed to the floor in agony. The bodyguard screamed in pain before Cain knocked him out with a swift kick to the face. Despite the violence, Hyde still doubted Cain was Rook's killer, swayed by Ton's earlier claims. To silence any doubt, Cain revealed his final proof: Rook's severed hand, sealed in a plastic bag, which Ton was forced to open himself. With no doubt left, the gang was forced to bow to Cain's authority. After taking down Hyde, Cain made it clear he blamed both Hyde and Lincoln for his time in prison. He demanded Lincoln be brought to him for a final confrontation. When two gang members asked to use the bathroom, Cain coldly refused, forcing them to relieve themselves on the spot, a grim show of control. Unfazed by Cain's threats, Hyde tried to keep his composure and dared him to act. In response, Cain forced him to his knees and warned that the next word out of his mouth could be his last. Just then, Lincoln arrived with 3 henchmen and was stunned to see the brother he believed long gone. Fueled by rage, Cain sprang into action, swiftly disarming the group and dragging them toward the rest of the gang, now completely under his control. Just moments away from exacting his revenge, Cain demanded one thing first: a clear answer as to why Lincoln wanted him dead. Cornered, Lincoln finally confessed. After their blood brother operation fell apart, one of his agents uncovered that Cain had been planning to betray them, leaving Lincoln with no other choice. Knowing full well about Evans's betrayal, Cain revealed that the corrupt officer had been feeding Lincoln false information. Instead of trusting his own brother, Lincoln had put his faith in a disgraced cop who wasn't even on his payroll anymore. Cain then recounted how he had tracked Evans to his new workplace, and after a tense confrontation, ended the betrayal with a single fatal hammer blow to Evans's skull. Impressed by Cain's cunning and meticulous planning, Lincoln offered him a new beginning, a chance to start over. But Cain wasn't interested. Without a word, he shot Hyde and then brutally beat him to death, leaving a horrifying scene that stunned everyone watching. Still reeling from the sudden loss of his most trusted aide, Lincoln barely had time to react before Cain turned his fury on him. He was stunned to discover his account balance had dropped to just $1,500. It was now clear that after escaping, Cain hadn't stopped at Evans, he had also gone after Stokes. During their confrontation, Stokes pulled a handgun and tried to intimidate him, but Cain dismissed the threat with ease, treating it like a joke as he quickly disarmed him. Desperate to save his life, Stokes agreed to all of Cain's demands. He transferred his entire $2.2 million account to support the families harmed by Lincoln's illegal loan schemes. With that, Lincoln was left with nothing but his loyal gang. Confident the odds were in his favor, he believed Cain could be taken out that night after all. Cain had only 2 bullets left, while Lincoln and his men had a combined total of 10. But Cain only needed 1 bullet, and he was saving it for Lincoln. Spotting Bez sneaking up behind Cain, Lincoln kept talking, trying to hold his brother's attention. As Cain briefly turned toward him, Bez struck, smashing a bottle over his head. Meanwhile, true to form, Ton panicked and fled the scene. This time, Ton returned armed with a submachine gun and opened fire on Cain, but not a single bullet found its mark. Seizing the opportunity, Cain disarmed Ton and turned the weapon on his enemies, mowing down several more. Even as the remaining thugs launched a relentless assault with stones, fists, and blades, Cain stood his ground, unshaken and unstoppable. One by one, they were taken out in savage fashion. Some had their arms broken and used as weapons against their own heads. Others were bitten on the neck with vampire-like ferocity, and one was stabbed repeatedly in the throat. In the end, only Bez, Lincoln, and Cain remained, standing face to face. Lincoln, unfazed, made it clear he didn't care whether Cain intended to expose him or not. Lincoln had placed a bounty on Cain's head because Cain's actions had tarnished his reputation among their allies. When Lincoln finally revealed the truth and pulled the trigger, he was stunned to discover the gun was empty. Cain, realizing he hadn't fallen for another one of Lincoln's tricks, simply laughed quietly relieved. But Lincoln wasn't finished. Refusing to back down, he lunged at Cain with the knife Bez had slipped him, determined to land a final blow. The brutal knife fight between the two brothers ended with Lincoln getting what he deserved, stabbed by Cain's own hand. Despite everything, Cain, who had always shown restraint even toward women or traitors who had once threatened him, chose to spare Bez. He allowed her to leave, carrying the bodies of the men she had served with unwavering loyalty. In the final scene, the image of one of Lincoln's victims appeared, a silent tribute to the lives shattered by his crimes. It was a surprise to see Cain's account balance proof that, in his own way, he had begun to right the wrongs left behind by his older brother. But Cain's revenge did more than bring him closure. It also brought justice to prey and vindication to Detective O'Hara. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel, where every film is explored in depth and every character has a story worth telling.